When it comes to self-development, the vital point is to practice. It's not about the path you choose, but the steps you take on your journey. If you're ready to transform and alchemize your unique purpose, then you've tuned into the right frequency. Welcome to the Vital Point podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As a transformation coach and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to transform, grow, and bring your dreams to life. With so many diverse and powerful modalities at our fingertips, this podcast aims to be more than just a conversation. It's an interactive guide providing not only knowledge, but also hands-on practices, from meditations to breathwork, from journaling exercises to real-life transformation techniques. I'll share my own experiences while also spotlighting those who are walking their paths and embodying what they teach. Because at the heart of transformation, the key is not just to learn, but to practice. That's the vital point. Are you ready to move from theory to practice, from passive listening to active transformation? Let's do more than just discuss change. Let's integrate it together. Just as words don't cook rice and hearing about push-ups won't make you stronger, remember, the vital point is to practice. Let's begin this journey together. My guest on today's show is Colombian-American integrative physician, Dr. Joe Tafur. After completing his family medicine training at UCLA, Dr. Tafur spent 2 years in academic research at the UCSD Department of Psychiatry. After his fellowship research over a period of 6 years, he lived and worked in the Peruvian Amazon at the traditional healing center Neo Rao Centro Espiritual, training there as an ayahuasquero. In his book, The Fellowship of the River, A Medical Doctor's Exploration into Traditional Amazonian Plant Medicine, through a series of stories, Dr. Tafur shares his unique experience and integrative medical theories. He's currently a fellow at the University of Arizona's Center for Integrative Medicine. With his spiritual community in Phoenix, Dr. Tafur co-founded the Church of the Eagle and the Condor. Dr. Tafur is also a co-founder of the nonprofit Modern Spirit. Among their projects is the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project, an analysis of the epigenetic impact of MAPS MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And this was really a wonderful conversation about the connection between the medicine world, the psychedelic world, and the medical and science world. And one of the areas that we dipped into is that spirit and heart are one of the bridges and the connections between these two worlds, and how the results that people are having with connecting to the spirit, whether that's with psychedelic medicines like ketamine, MDMA, ayahuasca, and breath work as well, speak for themselves. And whether or not science and medicine can fully explain what's happening basically becomes less relevant in the face of the results that patients are seeing in the reduction to their PTSD, to the anxiety, to their depression, to their addiction. The self-reported effects speak to themselves and are becoming more and more difficult to ignore. And also how connecting to these spiritual spaces transcends religious and political ideologies. So we get into different elements of healing and integration, bringing in the traditional healing beliefs from cultures like the Shipibo, the Navajo, even talking about some of the Tibetan teachings, and getting into, some of the more modern integration methods as well. Speaking of this spiritual connection to the heart space, one of the methods to access this is breath work. It's really a doorway into the expanded state of consciousness. And so I'd like to invite you to join me for Breathwork for Transformation, the second and fourth Sunday of each month online on Zoom. There's also a third session around the full moon that's available for subscribers. Breathwork for Transformation blends neurodynamic breathwork, somatic awareness, and meditation into a harmonious whole that can facilitate emotional release, foster deep creative insights, and usher in an unparalleled sense of relaxation. And these sessions are great for everyone, whether you're a seasoned breathwork enthusiast or a newcomer curious to step onto the path of self-care. These sessions are perfect for you. My participants regularly testify about the transformative power of our offerings, citing improvements in their meditation practice, enhanced integration of plant medicine experiences, and greater understanding of their subconscious minds. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Okay, Dr. Joe Tafur, welcome to the Vital Point podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So the Vital Point, the name of the show kind of came from this Buddhist, teaching where there's this 3 lines that really sums up the entire Buddhist sort of teaching and canon. But there's this book behind me in several hundred pages, as you can see, that is commentary on that. So that these 3 lines can go out into literally hundreds of pages that we can speak about. And so for me, when we're talking about integration, when we're talking about using these medicines, like you're really versed in, for transformation, the vital point is that we have to actually think about integrating and, how we sort of process and think about what the medicine is showing us, the messages that we're receiving. So I know you asked about the vital point, and I just wanted to. Wondering if that.
What are the 3 lines? What are the 3 lines, and what does it mean? The point.
One is introduced directly to one's own nature. One definitively decides upon this unique state. One continues directly with confidence and liberation. So it's really about just seeing the Buddha nature, the nature of mind, which I would say in the ayahuasca space, for me at least, is one of those times where I felt like I could connect to that nature, to that true self.
Yeah, I mean, it has that potential, right? It definitely has that potential, and so that's why people, use it sacramentally, like within spiritual practice, to try to access that, for themselves.
Yeah, it seemed like it gave me a framework, the Buddhist understanding of, some of these things that I've read about and maybe I've thought about them or, heard a teacher talk about it, from a intellectual basis. But then in that ayahuasca space, I felt like I could understand it better, like I was really experiencing it, including some of the things that I think you talk about in terms of the energies that maybe are all around us all the time that we're not really perceiving during the normal sort of day-to-day life that we have.
Right. And I think, isn't that within, I don't know how that is within the Buddhist teachings that you've explored, but are related to this vital point. Is that part of it with them? Is that part of their spectrum of understanding?
Yeah. For instance, like my main teacher is known for using what's called a prayer wheel. And inside this wheel that turns is millions of prayers and mantras. And the idea that as the prayer wheel turns and as the user's sort of mind is intent on sending these prayers out, that the energy is actually going out into the world, into the room, into the environment. And when, like, I could understand that intellectually, okay, you're spinning this wheel and there's something energetically that's happening. And I've used this practice myself, but it's almost like an imagination, right? But then there's been medicine experiences where I've picked up the wheel and started to work with it, and I felt like I could actually feel the energy in the room actually changing, like almost like waves of energy kind of coming out of the wheel into the environment. And then sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony and listening to the Icaros was where it kind of clicked of, oh, this is the same idea. This is the same concept where the Icaros are actually working with these energies in the room. And I'm definitely not an expert, so I would love to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
on that, or if
Well, I mean,
I'm
I think it's like, so this energy in the room, that's the question
mm,
mark. And so I don't know, it's like, to me, it's, of course, if you don't feel it or you don't sense it, something like that, whether that's through meditation, arriving that, I mean, I think your teacher is developing this prayer wheel, right? It's not dependent on psychedelics,
right.
their practice or the evolution of their practice or this technology that they've created, right? So
Mm-hmm.
somehow, just through meditation or through their spiritual practice, they arrived at this thing that for you, I guess, it was difficult to imagine or to feel. And then I guess when the medicine space, or in this case with ayahuasca, you were able to feel that energy.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
then so the idea is that there's like a sensibility, that exists. And so then this medicine, or you had brought it up, or what people would talk about, like hallucinations and imagination. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of room in the medicine space, and if you're under the influence of some sacramental substance or maybe a psychedelic substance, there's a lot of room for projection, into that space with your imagination, from your memory, from your thoughts. That's true. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of ways you can fool yourself, and there's a lot of foolishness around all of it. You see it a lot, and so that's what people are kind of turned off by, often, because they see it's not. I don't know. Some of it's expressed in a way that doesn't seem that thoughtful, and at the same time, like there is this honesty around, like you felt it,
Right.
and then somebody else is feeling it without taking the medicine. They're feeling it through their meditation, and they're sharing about it, and they're comparing notes about it. And so the idea is that there is something that exists, like a metaphysical phenomenon, and the quantum physics implies a lot of mysterious things. In addition to what people, if they're honest about their experience, yes, most people have strange things happen to them that don't quite make sense, through the rational explanation of how everything is supposed to work. So deep down, I think everyone knows it's a little more complicated, or nobody really understands, nobody really knows, you know, about all the ins and outs of all of it. So then what I see is that my experience is that getting like closer to that, to learning about the energy like that, or trying to work with the energy like that. And that's something I talk about a lot. That access is kind of linked to your emotional apparatus of your body, you know, your heart space, your feelings. And so to get deeper with that, you have to get deeper with that emotional side of yourself. So overly rational approach, like you're not gonna access it very well. And that's very common to see that people who are very logical, very rational, very intellectual trying to approach these things, they don't experience it. And then maybe because of a medicine experience or a psychedelic experience, it shifts the way their mind is working. And so they can't do their usual, like, egoic little patterns that they've been using to kind of, go through their world. And so then they gain access to, different parts of themselves. And so that's a very vulnerable place, really, you know, like the same place that you would come into contact with these energies or become more aware of these things is the same place where you're going to find like some of your deepest wounds, you know, some of your most uncomfortable emotional experiences, they're going to be there. And so, you that do breath work, it's like you see this happen to people in breath work, right?
Right.
People in breath work access a lot of mystical phenomenon. That's not uncommon at all. When they have major emotional experiences many times, like a lot of emotional catharsis, and
Hmm.
also the veil, between their apparent reality starts to blur. Haven't
Yeah.
you've experienced that?
Oh yeah, myself and definitely with clients.
Right? So it's kind
Yeah.
of common. So that kind of implies like that there's something going on.
Right.
So the breath work is changing the way their brain is working. It's allowing them to kind of bypass some of their ego structure and get more into like a deeper body sense of themselves and a deeper emotional sense of themselves. And it's through that connection and exploration that they find these, whatever, they work through these traumas, they work through energy from the past, and they also gain like a bigger access to mystical, awareness. They have strange experiences that they have to kind of figure out how they're going to integrate that into their system of thinking or whatever they want to call it. But the reality is that they experienced it, and if you were right there, well, then you experienced it.
Yeah.
So you could call it a hallucination or whatever they want to call it, but emotionally, something very real happens that has a major impact on the person and even the person observing.
It's that feeling, the
That's right.
emotion of it, right? Like there's when it happens, there's no the thinking and analytic part just kind of turns off. Like there's no questioning it. You because you feel it.
Well,
You're
it
there.
turns out the analysis is probably always after the feeling.
Hmm.
So the society, like I said, which is not really supporting like these vulnerable places within ourselves, is like leaning so heavily, into the thinking. But then as we like explore more and more, whether it's neuroscience or meditation or it, like maybe like most of the thinking is actually like just secondary to the feeling.
So how can we start to develop that trust in the heart and the feeling rather than
Yeah.
relying so much on the thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it's like the spaces and places that you're supporting, so then that's what I say. It's like, so people need the society, the culture, I believe needs like, and this is something you see a little more commonly in traditional culture or different parts of the world where there is more kind of mystical awareness or energetic awareness, and some of the things that brings in some cases, it can even sometimes more harmonious relationships with the ecosystem, are related to that kind of
Hmm.
consciousness. And so what we see a lot of times, there's different people that have made comment about it. I say like creating spaces for people, what I would call a ceremonial space, where it's a place where they're safe, like truly safe, where they can be vulnerable and where there's no judgment. And so the lack of judgment also like implies that the people holding that space are working to transcend their own judgment. That they're not projecting a lot of their own judgment into the space to create that judgmental space. So we have that problem of like a lot of spiritual opportunities for the people right now. It's not safe. Some of them, yes. I'm not trying to say across the board, but some, like let's say some church environments, some religious environments where people would go to hope to try to get, go deeper with their feeling and go deeper into their spiritual connection. Like that's kind of like the purpose of that kind of thing,
Right.
originally. And so then the problem is that if it's not safe, they're going to be harmed or whatever, then they can't really open up. They can't really trust. They can't really be vulnerable because they're going to have to be vulnerable, which is uncomfortable and awkward. And then there can't be judgment against them, over what they're going to express or what they're going through. And so there's a lot of judgment, in a lot of these religious environments right now that so then it blocks people being able to really open up that way. So there's there are other environments, there are other spiritual practice environments and even religious environments where I think these things are more, I would say, like consciously addressed for their role in helping people heal and evolve and grow. That's like in the traditional perspective and like some indigenous perspectives, the spiritual growth and the healing are the same thing.
Mm.
So then the conditions that would promote either one would be this, the same. And so if you're doing integration with people after they go through whatever, maybe they go through a psychedelic experience, maybe they're in a rehab, they're going through something. And so, creating environments. And then the other big thing that, Malidoma Some, the African healer, always talked about he's from Burkina Faso that passed away, is like, well, nature, community, and spirituality. So like some kind of access to nature, some community supporting the process, and then the tolerance of the spiritual discussion. The spiritual discussion is not limited to just like a very like askew intellectual, like what's that over there, but like, hey, is that something that can nourish you to be connected? Is it something helpful, not to fool yourself or to delude yourself, but is there something helpful in understanding our relationship to the mystery, the metaphysics of it, the quantum physics of it? And so, an example like this, it was a new one from the MAPS conference for me, was this year, this group from Emory University in Atlanta, who's like chaplains and spiritual healthcare providers within the modern Western healthcare system. So that's an interesting example, the chaplaincy, that still exists within our culture, established. It's not being driven out of the hospitals. They allow the chaplains to be there in many cases, and they provide, what's supposed to be a universal support, regardless of religious belief. Like that already exists in our system, in our society, in our culture. And so then the chaplains are one of the groups that had been, were being considered and have been considered and have been included like in the MDMA, assisted therapy with the MAPS trial and the FDA approval, like who is allowed to be in the room with those people. Do they have to be licensed? What kind of training or experience would the FDA require for somebody to sit for somebody else while they're on MDMA? Do they have to be a psychologist? What kind of skill set would be helpful and supportive in such an experience? And so the chaplains have always been, kind of one of the roles that has been thought to be accepted and integrated there. And so then these guys, this group was related to Divinity School, I think at Emory University, published in JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association, on CERTs. CERT is a spiritual, existential, religious, or theological experience. And so they're saying, well, these certs are here. They are. They exist, from an observation. If we ask people, they'll tell us they had this. And it says in the psychedelic assisted therapy field, the cert is very common.
Right.
So there's another thing to observe and note as scientists, that analytical observation is, yes, that would be considered real. And then lastly, that the CERT experience is clinically relevant to the psychedelic assisted therapy. What they go through in these CERTs turns out to be affect their health directly. So then now we see this metaphysical like interaction with physical, mental, emotional health documented and published, in JAMA. And so it's like we're beginning to face these things, that it's like, hey, these people were not getting better. The ones in this study, they're, addicts, and the psilocybin study, or end of life anxiety in psilocybin study, or they were, and this is mostly psilocybin research, MDMA, that people do have, supernatural experiences in some of those sessions, maybe less common, but it does exist. So when it does happen, they find it to be clinically relevant. And so, and those are people who had this trauma that couldn't heal for years and years and years. So then they're like, okay, well, I guess we need to learn about how to deal with these certs. Because they said, we found out that the adverse childhood experience The ACE is a big deal, and we
Right.
need to learn how to manage that because it's clinically relevant and it comes up a lot in psychedelic assisted therapies. So we need to learn more about how we're going to deal with that. Similarly, we need to learn more about how we're going to deal with these certs, and maybe we need to bring, religious, spiritual practitioners into the fold to help us work with these things because they have more direct experience.
You said so many cool things there that I want to ask about.
Sure.
As far as the certs, do you have a sense that the medical or science community, like, how do they explain that? Or is it, does the result that is measurable in terms of data sort of supersede the need to understand it?
Yeah, it supersedes it, I believe, because these are reports. This is no one's claiming that anyone knows what it is,
Mm-hmm.
or trying to preach to everybody else. This is what it is. I know it, and you don't know it. That's what's really boring about like the analytical approach to spirituality. It's like, well, they're just trying to find the absolute truth, but then the absolute they don't know what it is. Nobody does.
Right.
Like I said, they don't even know how your brain works. You know, they know some things about it. They don't know everything about it. And so it's okay. That's okay. We don't have to like stop everything because we don't have it all explained.
Yeah.
It's okay to talk about it. It's okay to live. It's okay to be alive and not understand that completely. It doesn't bother a dog, you know, to not have that analytical like comprehension of the neuroscience in their brain. So as we move forward, there's many examples, and the simplest example within the mental health field is like the psychological scales. So they ask people, about a depression scale. They ask people about an anxiety scale. They ask people about, how's their sleep. So these is subjective reports. How do you feel? When you wake up in the morning, do you feel like this? Do you feel like you have a hard time, finding pleasure in the activities that you used to enjoy? You know, do you find yourself like, wrapped up in fearful thoughts for, most of the day? It's like these are subjective questions.
Mm-hmm.
They're reporting this to you. So you believe them that that's their experience. You could walk away and blow them off. Oh, psha, they just can't figure it out. They need to let it go. But it's there, it's published, it's evidence, and it turns out it's clinically relevant. Like those scales are being used to track people's progress, and now they're being correlated to like physiologic phenomena. Did their inflammation go down? Is their fight or flight response calming down after the PTSD treatment? And how are they scoring on their PTSD scale? That is the ultimate measure of the like PTSD research, is this subjective scale. So I'm just saying it's a normal part of mental health. Tracking is subjective report from the patient because that's what's considered real. We don't have to whether it is like an imaginary fantasy or just part of a monstrous illusion that no one understands. Within the realm of healthcare, it's okay to talk about that. That's significant. That what that person told you about how they feel, that's useful to understanding how you might be able to help them, including whether or not you're going to use medication in assisting them to get better or not. Physical, material intervention. So I would just say it's there. So now it's like, they could fight it and say, no, we don't want to hear about that, or just not, it's not politically correct or like acceptable to hear about these kind of experiences, that people have. That if you did allow the self-report to be there, then it would be there. It would be, if you just ask around, you're going to hear a lot of these. It's up to you whether you want to listen or you don't want to listen. you know
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like, I often think about what it will be like in, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, if the current sort of direction that we're moving in keeps going. And I take it back to um, an experience I had in an ayahuasca ceremony where the facilitators lit a fire, and seeing and kind of experiencing the healing properties of that fire, and that people have gathered around fire for healing for, basically most of humanity, right? And that's why there's some healing energy there, maybe. And the sort of the insight that came through as a result of that was that the things that we consider magic or that we can't explain, you could explain it through science. We just don't get it yet, right? Like at some point in history, fire was magic. And then now we can explain it from science and the molecules that are working together with the air and, all of that. So I guess I'm just always curious.
Part of the fire that's still magic, huh?
Right. But
Then
but
that's
we
the
but we
thing.
understand a little bit more, right? So it's like when we're talking about these things that are, the quote unquote woo woo, the energy stuff, the things that some of these more ancient wisdom lineages, whether we're talking about the Shipibo or the Tibetans or Native Americans, that they understand. And like I'm curious what we're going to understand as we put that
Yeah.
scientific lens into it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's always value in, not maybe not always, but there's a lot of value in like the scientific, assessment. There's like, it's fun to, and that's the idea of this eagle and the condor prophecy, that we're in this time when the science and the spiritual and the heart and the mind, start to respect each other.
Yeah.
And so this idea is like, okay, if you're just intellectual and you're just, you're bringing that arrogance of like, oh, these dumb savages, they think fire is magic. I know what fire is. It's the combusting of these, of this wood, and that's this car, blah, 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 and the light, and this is how it's made. And, they have all that explanation, but then somehow their approach with the Western analysis is falling very short in a lot of aspects of society. Major mental health crisis, major ecological disequilibrium, like major. As far as like the elevated position, it's like ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
From a global perspective, it's not very impressive. To see society go in certain directions. So the humility of the like hyper intellectual perspective. It's like it's just whether or not they want to accept it. It's obvious. Major failure in mental health,
Mm.
like major, and major failure around ecological whatever awareness and sustainability. So it's not that impressive. It is cool, like to be able to use a cell phone and do all, it's helpful. It's amazing. The internet, here we are. So many
Right.
major advances. It's incredible. It's amazing. It's
Uh-huh.
made out of the earth. This computer is made out of the earth. That's
Mm.
what it's made out of.
Right.
It's like, is that magic? It's like, well, there's part of it that seems kind of magical. I think, like staring into the fire. Here I am looking at you. There's something kind of extra ordinary about it. Then there's the path of the heart, and the sitting around the fire, and then they're kind of that side, the heart side, kind of resentful, brokenhearted, like upset about all the pain that has been caused by some of the kind of arrogant um, and kind of neglectful, like a lot of the disregard that the intellectual, like, oh, get over it,
Mm.
who cares about your feelings. And so there's just like resistance from the heart space of like, it's not safe, it's not, this isn't good, you know to open up here. But then it's like, okay, well, the way things are, we have to open up more again. And so this idea of a lot of indigenous cultures, starting to share their wisdom, like you mentioned with the Shipibo or the other ones that are like sharing with a culture or with cultures that in many cases, have been very, very dismissive, of their existence, like dramatically so,
Right.
just like willing to have for the convenience of having some oil or some gold or at your fingertips, if they were to be eradicated and you found out later, you'd be like, oh, maybe you would have who knows how much attention would be given to that or is given to that, with the regular phenomenon that it is. So all that's going on. And so then as you see, what I think could happen, and this is what I'm observing, is that as this trauma informed healing grows, when they say, hey, you know what, it's not enough. It's not just in their head. Like they need somatic experiencing. They need breath work. They need internal family systems. We need to get past this purely brain model. The brain model is not effective. So it apparently is inadequate, especially if you're actually trying to help someone. If it's just making a drawing to show somebody what you drew, that can be very impressive. But if you're actually trying to help an individual, then it turns out we have to go beyond that. And so we have to get into these. So the trauma-informed healing is kind of making its way through the system. It's like if you are not trauma-informed and realizing the way that some of this trauma and these ACEs and all these experiences could be feeding into like all these long-term health problems, then it's like you're kind of behind.
Right.
The science, the analysis is teaching us that. The analysis is establishing that in fact and in the biology. It's not just an idea or a concept or imagination or a vision. This is biochemically, observed for those that are like more, interested in that dimension of things. And so that's going on. And so then, we have to deal with this trauma-informed healing. So now we need approaches that will adequately address trauma or more effectively address trauma. And so then they start expanding into these other areas, whether that's, you see some of that happening in the sacred ceremonial work. We see a lot of that happening in the psychedelic assisted therapy work. We see a lot of it supported by psychotherapy, by somatic experience therapy, by internal family systems, by breath work, by EMDR or whatever, all these different ways that by, integration circles and community support and peer support in AA and in rehab, by, further exploration into people's spiritual practice and spiritual connection and the impact that could have, in helping people emotionally regulate and get through, some trauma experience that they have. As they start doing that and that starts growing, because people realize, okay, that model, that way of thinking was like, it was they're very loud. They really didn't want to hear from anyone else, but it wasn't really working. And so now the people that are suffering, it's the suffering that will eventually shove it, forward, because the people and their families, and their loved ones and their children, it's too much to bear to just hang your hat on a system of thought. If that system of thought is too disconnected from what's happening, and you're going to watch a loved one, go through some torment, it's going to break your heart, whether you believe that you have a heart to break or not. And so that happens. And so then those people are looking and they're looking and they're looking and they're looking and they're finding treatments and ways that are like, whoa, this is doing this. And then what's curious is that these treatment spaces, let's talk about, PTSD and, at the MAPS conference, Rick Perry, the ex-governor of Texas, self-proclaimed at the MAPS conference, knuckle-dragging right-winger, supposedly, but, a heartfelt person that expressed a lot of things that people could relate to. And eventually he just said, the vets were getting helped by psychedelic assisted therapies, and he couldn't deny it. And so we have to learn about this, because these people, their lives are more important than your reputation or what you thought your reputation was. So then you allow these treatments to grow, and whether it's ketamine assisted therapy here in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Tucson, just like pop up here, there. And it's like, because it's always trauma, and we need something that'll help with the trauma, and this is going to help with the trauma, and it might open a cert, but we're willing to take that risk We'll deal with it if it comes, and we'll go with it. And you see that as these really vulnerable spaces and places are being cared for in these people in a context that is much broader, that allows for some transcendent experiences, they start healing, in ways that was not previously, observed, that were not previously observed. And as they start healing and it becomes more commonplace to heal in that such a way, the mystical awareness and the mystical connection grows through the society. Not for religious reasons, not because of like, you should believe this, because if you don't believe this, you're not with us, but because what you started with, because you felt it and it was real and it really made things different for you in your life and for your loved ones. And it seems to be somehow related to the fabric of things, to this so-called vital point. It's like it seemed to be related to me seeing myself and the way it is in its entirety, meaning beyond the lifespan, like in its entirety, like the universe. I have that's the place maybe that we can somehow make sense of things from, according to the Buddhists and to so many other like deep spiritual practitioners seeking, some kind of harmony in their life's, journey. And so it's the universal awareness, I believe, will grow. And I think the science will support the clinically relevant. It's like, if it is, so then that's why I make a big deal about always, I repeat it over and over again, because they'll say like, oh, well, look here, I'm on this podcast. It's like, well, Joe has a church. He's part of a church, and the ayahuasca is their sacrament, and it's a spiritual practice. But here we're talking about healing and medicine, and they call it medicine in the culture. And so shouldn't that be, in the realm of the medical, the therapeutics? And it's like, well, the traditional way in Shipibo in Peru, it is spiritual practice. It's regarded that way. And it is regarded that way in Native American culture, always. And yes, it's true. Everyone accepts that it can impact your health.
Yeah.
And so, because within the indigenous, whatever approach, framework, this spiritual growth and healing are the same thing. And yes, it's true. Approaches that really effectively impact spiritual growth and effectively impact health, that they do impact your physiology. And it's quite it's easier to see sometimes in the emotional physiology, and in the function of the brain, and sometimes in other aspects of the physical body. So it's like, that's the thing. It's like, where does the rubber hit the road? So that's fair to not believe in stuff that doesn't hit the road. Yeah. But to say that rubber doesn't hit the road anywhere is like, oh, I don't know about that, And so I think that the suffering is pushing people to see, like, if, let's say, this spiritual rubber hits the road somewhere that can help us, well, we want to know about that. And that's what I see. And so when I'm working at a ketamine clinic in Phoenix, Arizona as a doctor, and seeing a number of people walking into the office, and they're saying, I'm like, oh, what brought you in? Why do you have to do the intake? Why are you here? How did you hear about it? What are you doing? So, something's missing for me. I think something's missing. I think it's spiritual. I think what's missing for me is spiritual. And I think, I don't know, I heard you guys might be able to help me find that. And I've heard that like several times from people here. And, you're from Arizona, like here in Phoenix. Tucson is a lot more, curious about things like that than the average Phoenician. I don't know. That's what the common idea. So it's just like, it's strange, it's happening. And so then I see them go through their deal, and they say that kind of stuff. Like the guy's like, yeah, no, I think it's like, again, so they start talking, I think I want to find something spiritual, but for me, my experience with religion, it was just a lot of BS, and it didn't do anything for me. And, they were just shoving things down my throat. And it's like, okay, so the spiritual practice, and I think I'm not against any religion or anything, but I'm saying their spiritual practice, we should consider, and as I repeat this over and over, it's like we should consider its impact on the health.
Right.
Like if if spiritual practice really in its nature, the vital point, I think the Buddhists, those people that you're talking about would agree with me
Uh-huh.
that this should be healthy for you. Your spiritual well-being should improve. Your mental health should improve. Your emotional health should improve, and your physical health. Why not? If you're feeling better and more resilient, then it should improve as well. So, if the spiritual practices that you are engaged in are not doing that, if they're making you feel worse mentally, if there's like growing mental illness in your religious community, like that's a concern. There's a concern that it's not something that we're going to judge, but we should reflect on that. How many people need to be medicated to participate in your spiritual practices?
Mm.
Do they find a connection in themselves to that, to a nourishing source? And many do. And I'm not trying to say no one does. Many do. But when there's, so then around the religious trauma, we can kind of like use this as a guide of like, hey, okay, we're not against religion and that, but it's better be healthy if we're going to have it in our society, in our community.
Yeah, the connection of the spiritual, and bringing that aspect into your life is so important. And I think what you're saying is that's one of the beauties of some of these medicines, whether you want to call them medicines or sacrament or,
Right.
psychedelic, whatever, is that it does open us up to that dimension and the experience beyond the analytical. One of the things that I thought of when you were speaking was like, some people, I think we all, maybe a lot of people, I'll say that, when they start to have these peak experiences or these spiritual experiences, the initial reaction is, I want to share it with everyone and I want to like yell it from the rooftops. And yet, perhaps it's more valuable to just embody those changes and the things that you've experienced, because when you do that, then people start coming to you. Hey, what's different? You're so different. You've changed, or, you used to be so depressed and you seem so happy now, or whatever it is. Like the evidence speaks for itself. You don't even have to say, hey, this is what I did. I'm for psychedelics. And I also like that you brought in the sort of the more conservative viewpoint. I saw a meme the other day that had like a guy from Burning Man, sort of, if I say picture a guy at Burning Man, like exactly what you're thinking of,
Right.
and a soldier on the other side, and it said, name one issue that these two people agree on besides psychedelics. So it's amazing that
Partying.
it's amazing
Music,
that it's bringing people together
camping.
because of the result of camping.
We have a lot in common. There's a lot of soldiers that go to Burning Man, but go ahead.
But yeah, it's amazing that the results that people are seeing are bringing these disparate groups together.
Yeah.
Under a common, like, hey, this is working. We need to have more of it. And
That's very beautiful. Yeah, and that was the thing, right? When at the MAPS conference, when Rick Doblin came up and gave his speech in his all white suit and is kind of a Burning Man icon, and doing his thing. And then right after him, Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, Secretary of Energy under Donald Trump, like this is like as far into the right wing as you can get as the power structure. And he was the one saying, look, it's like, and it's, to me, it's like the suffering is too great. Let's to give a break to the polarization. It's too many people's families. It's too many people's, relatives. We're going to have to find some common ground. The common ground is healing, and that's exciting, because that's also like, to me, that's why I think health is like the bridge between science and spirituality.
right. I'm also curious, you mentioned the clergy and the clergy being inserted and accepted into the therapeutic setting because
Yeah.
of their experience with the certs and with the spiritual aspect of life and sort of the mystical. Um, and it brings up something that I wanted to ask you, because one of the things that I noticed at the MAPS conference that I think concerned me a little bit, just
Right.
personally, um, was the amount of people that were there that were curious about bringing psychedelic therapy or psychedelic medicines into their work that haven't had any of their own experiences. And so the difference between somebody like a clergyman who maybe has never worked with a psychedelic but has a lot of experience with the spiritual aspect of life and the mystical versus somebody that goes and gets like a certification to do something but has never done any of their own work. I would say that I would feel more comfortable with the clergy person supporting me in my experience. And do you agree? I mean, do you think that people need to have their own experiences to be facilitating
I
and
think that
supporting people?
I think that like in the initial wave of like the clinical research with psychedelics, that because of the FDA approval and that process with the DEA, they could not obligate, people to have the psychedelic experience. When you go through the MAPS training, there was a huge thing that they were negotiating about. How do you have to have an experience to be completely certified? What kind of experience? So then breathwork retreats were acknowledged, as
Uh-huh.
a potential for people that wanted to practice this, but maybe they didn't want to do ketamine, or they don't have a legal access to MDMA or psilocybin. They were trying to come up with ways. Could a Vipassana retreat, like a 9-day sit, with that meditation, would that qualify? Well, there's a movement around that. Like those were examples that you needed some experiential component to your training. A lot of the developing programs are interested in that. As far as requiring that, I think that Naropa also requires that over in Colorado, but it can be
Mhm.
breath work, it can be ketamine, it can be something else, but something they feel like. So, I would just want to say that maybe a lot of people think that it should be a part of the required training, and the obligation to make people do psychedelics who maybe, let's say they're great clergy people, or they're just really special in those spaces. Like maybe they don't need to do it. Okay, so they've done something else that people would feel somehow comparable. So that's being negotiated out. I think that at the beginning, and I think if you look at all the researchers that are part of the trials and the therapists that are in the trials, I'm not aware of any of them that are not experienced. So the data that is being produced is based on that.
Mhm.
So it's not just like, oh, any old therapist. That's not true. All the therapists that are getting these incredible results in the MAP study, as far as I know, are experienced. So there will be a question mark around like, should you obligate people? I think you should encourage them. I think it seems like a great idea. It seems important. Can some people do it without having that? Probably. Are the people going to be more effective that have that kind of experience? That's quite possible. And
Yeah.
so people getting into that line of work without any spiritual work or any kind of um, personal psychedelic experience, I don't know. I mean, it's not it's not as simple as ever. It's not like, oh, okay,
Sure.
yeah, maybe, you'll have a successful business doing that kind of thing, and help a lot of people. Maybe you could be more effective.
Mhm.
And so, as when the clients are deciding, I want to go to this one or I want to go to that one, you know, how good they are does factor in. It's not just like it's coming down the pipeline, and we got to eat it however it comes. I mean, it's still
Sure.
is currently, yeah, right. It's currently cash business,
Uh-huh.
ketamine assisted therapy, for example, and so no one is obligated to go at all. And the trials are, they're clinical trials. So all these people who want to get in on the game and be part of it and do it, it's like, well, they don't really know what they're talking about. It's just a lot of talk. It's like so many. We watch so many ventures, or like flopping and folding because I don't know, they were more interested in just the ramping up and the scaling out and the expansion of what they thought was just so easy.
Right.
And then it wasn't. Like, you work at a rehab related place right now. There's like,
Hmm.
I say it all the time. There's no major brand name rehab that's like nationally. There's some places that maybe are well known and famous because maybe the cost or the money involved,
Uh-huh.
but it's not like, outside of the community stuff like AA, some of the community driven things. So the idea that a business is going to monopolize such treatments, like, we have not seen anyone pull that off in what is so specialized and so personalized.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. There's no real. I just think there's a lot of hoopla, not much, beyond that. In a year, is that person still going to be involved in this kind of work and this kind of business? Is it really interesting enough to them? Do they like it? Do they want to keep doing it? You know,
Yeah.
it is a factor of why people stay in a line of work. It's not just because this is like the thing.
Right. And like you mentioned earlier in the conversation, the sort of the key of the heart opening aspect, that whatever it is that you're doing, that there's and that the psychedelic medicines help with that opening of the heart, and help you be more empathetic, help you be more supportive, that the ceremonial setting is, this place where the heart can open and be vulnerable. I think sort of on a, like on a somewhat related topic to what I just asked, I'm also curious about, I feel like a lot of people, when they first start to have psychedelic experiences, um, there's often a impulse to work with the medicine. They come out of like a peak experience and they're like, the medicine told me I'm supposed to serve the medicine, or I'm
Yeah.
supposed to become a shaman. I'm supposed to do this, do that. And I'm never going to discourage someone from that. But like sometimes I like to sort of gently have the conversation of like, well, this is, that's not going to make your life any easier. In fact, you're setting yourself up for, a path of a lot of your own work, like you were saying earlier, and I'm curious, why do you think that is that so many people have those peak experiences and then feel called to make that their own work? And what would you say to somebody
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that
yeah. I
situation?
think that there's like, it happens like anytime that somebody, let's say somebody has a big, impactful experience, with anything, it feels extremely meaningful to you. And as we're all trying to find guidance in our lives, and sometimes it's like the things that we feel are so meaningful, we think, well, that's what I should do.
Yeah.
That was the most meaningful thing I have been a part of, whether
Right.
that was like playing baseball or whatever. And so when you have these huge experiences, and maybe it was like, maybe turn somebody around, in their mental health or their physical health or something really major, or relationships. And so it's really a big deal. And so it is common. It always happens. It happens like throughout time. And so a part of it is just the inexperience of the culture, because in Peru, at the ayahuasca healing center, or the spiritual center I worked at, where there was ayahuasca ceremony, Niwerao, and other centers like that, that happens all the time.
Right.
That's like once a week, somebody will say that.
Right.
Once a week, somebody's going to say that. And so one difference is like within a cultural context like that, where that's so common. So everyone, the shaman, whoever, can say, well, that happened last week to that person, or just kind of put it in perspective. That it's like, that's great that you had such a powerful experience, but it's like, that may just be a little flash in the pan, and like you said, this path, if you want to really go down this path, it's very long. So the person that's like excited about it for a day or two, has a little crush, like that might turn out, it might not. So it's like, the person that says, oh, I love this, I want to learn this. It's like it doesn't matter to the people that do that. It's like when people say, I'm a doctor, say like, oh yeah, I could have gone to medical school, like I was thinking about going. It's like, okay, like, that's cool, and I respect that, but it's like then to go is like years.
Right.
It's like, so what from where you're saying you want to do it to what it is so far away that it's just like it's an idea that you're floating out there.
Yeah.
So then I tell them like, that's cool, I think that kind of thing evolves over time, and so that reveals itself over time. And I say the people that I know that have stuck with it, it's a slow process, very slow process. The people that were so excited and so like, a few do come through like that, a lot don't. So there's that to reflect on. Like that's what I've observed, you know. And then, the last piece, which I'll bring up from my friend Sochi and her teacher in Colombia, from their tradition and their experience of watching people go through, medicine experiences. And, it's not their first time they've seen such a thing. And they say, if this medicine is making you feel more special than everyone else, or more, unique, or more, just something so extraordinary compared to the rest, like it's not working. This should be making you feel more integral to everything that's happening. So if that starts to happen to you, that you start really getting carried away and kind of that manic tendency of like why you are the chosen one and it's so special for you to do this, then you're not really like connecting at the deeper level. And so it's something to investigate.
Yeah, definitely. So you just mentioned integral, and I wanted to ask you that before we wrap up. Is what are some ways that you guide or suggest to the people you're working with to help them integrate the healing and the experiences they're having with these medicines, whether it's ayahuasca or ketamine or breathwork, whatever it is, because some of the healing is happening within that medicine experience, but sometimes it seems like the medicines are shining a light. They're saying like, hey, here's the direction you need to go in outside of the ceremony or outside of the therapy. So what are some of those things that have been helpful?
Yeah, I think, things I repeat all the time are like some of the traditional perspectives. So one of the Navajo wisdom keepers that we know here in Phoenix, and their attitude is like, instead of set and setting, and then the journey, and then the integration, they call it, like, how do you approach it? With love. The experience itself is the gift, and then afterwards is the responsibility of the gift.
Hmm.
So there should people also treat it that way, that what you receive in your medicine experience is something that you have the opportunity to take advantage of and work with, and or to disregard, and that the experience itself is not enough to change your life, and that's a basic fact and an experience of observing many people go through such things. So then, Shipibo style, Ricardo always said to, take care of your medicine. Like, you have received some medicine, now take care of it. If you go back and you whatever start doing the same drugs or this or that, and you're going to wash it out. You're going to wash it out what you just gained. And so in the Shipibo style, they have, they do it in the dieta, that you're in this diet period where you're integrating all day, every day in retreat. That you only, instead of like ketamine, like go to the clinic, Uber home. It's like, no, you live there.
Right.
So the retreat, I think, is a very valuable way to take advantage of the altered state, because the science is also supporting this, idea of an afterglow period with an associated neuroplasticity window where it may be easier for you to change some of the ways you're thinking and acting and being, you know, if you were to really kind of lean into that afterglow, critical window period. And so the idea is that Shipibo style, okay, you're in a retreat, like extended retreat, a few weeks to be in the process. And Navajo, like ceremonies, when they do ceremony for somebody and they say, oh, they basically had this experience that makes them kind of like a holy person, that they've touched the sacred. And so now they need to be treated like a holy person for, 4 to 5 days. That for the following 4 to 5 days, they don't work. They need to be like cooked for and fed for, and they just need to sit and integrate and really take in what they've been through. So those are some like traditional concepts around that. Then in those traditional communities, of course, there people have access to the people they were in ceremony with on a more regular basis. So it's like, so to be able to talk and share and communicate with people about what you went through that can understand and relate to what you went through is really important for people, and so that is tough when people go and have an experience and then they go to their job or their family and they can't talk about it.
Right.
And it's very common, they're very like, it's very tough for it to gain traction. There's some room for it to slip. So you need to process. And so like in the ketamine therapy research world, there's seem to suggest that like, yeah, if you can get them to process like within a day or two, that it's the word on the street is that it's very helpful to take advantage of that, that space. And so there's the processing, there's the communal support, social support. Do you have somebody, that you can talk to about this? If you don't, is there access to a coach or a therapist or someone, clergy person, someone that can help you to keep working on what you're doing? So those are like some very basic things. And then there's all the rest. So it's like, there's in Phoenix, there's our community is like restarting. People are doing like, integration circles. So people can come together once a month and talk and connect with the community that's ready to share and learn from each other and exchange, and then there's the more, direct and personal stuff that really integration practices, like what I'd send a lot of people to. If I see somebody that's gone through something big and they need further support, like somatic experience therapy is it can be very powerful. Psychotherapy with the right person, the therapist that's open to all this stuff. Internal family systems you brought up. It's like there's been a lot of internal family systems kind of interaction and bridge work with psychedelic treatments, and so there's people have experience with working off of breath work. Same thing,
Right.
So those are some basic experiences. Then there's more simple, like, spiritual practices that people can do that research supports, like, mindfulness practices, contemplative prayer, gratitude journals. Those are simple things. Like they've done research with gratitude journal where just, guided to write down 5 things you're grateful for every day, as a simple practice to help you integrate. So I think there's a lot of things to do. I think you want to, have something in place for yourself that, yes, it's going to make a big, big difference to have some way, some place to take it. And that it's traditionally would be regarded as, yeah, you're really taking a big risk to not have anything in place.
Right.
Because most of the time it can wash out.
I remember going to work in my office when I still worked in an office on Monday, and we would have like a team meeting, and my boss would go, "So who wants to share what they did over the weekend?" I'd be sitting there just saying, I have no idea even how to approach that question at this point.
Right. And that's going to start changing,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
going to start changing, and that's the part of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Is what happens to the culture when that's not so crazy to talk about. I saw
Right.
somebody in Phoenix, which I don't know. This was just kind of a surprise, but it was like, okay, the MAPS conference was so big,
Uh-huh.
and so that something that big, it like has ripples of just size. And so then I was at Whole Foods in Phoenix, and somebody came up to me and they're like, "Oh my God, I saw you talk at the MAPS conference," and just like having this at the supermarket, like it was just like part of what happened. in the culture. It's like it was big. A lot of people were involved, and so it's like 12,000. That's like a big concert, a big something. So
Right.
it's like people. So it's definitely changing a little bit. It's like we say, as those conversations start getting more okay, and the knowledge about like how that healing can work or help, or that spiritual growth can work or help, and the kind of ways that people realize, oh, I need to be. Well, the last piece I'll just throw out there is that because these things that we're talking about are vulnerable spaces,
Hmm.
your belief system, your whether or not you had a spiritual experience or existential experience, in your own life. Like it's so easy to be misunderstood when you're sharing about that, like in a big open group, public space at the office. It's so easy for people to misunderstand what you're talking about. So
Sure.
the traditional people would say that's very intimate conversation.
Right.
So you kind of need to be like really in a trusting relationship with somebody to really reveal that much about it. Because that same place I was talking to you about the beginning is like where your hurts and your trauma and your all this stuff is there when we open up these places. And so
Mm.
similarly, it can shock another person because that touches into their hot spots. Because like if we're gonna
Right.
go there and they're like, well, I don't want to go there, that's too woo woo. Could that mean in some people's subconscious, like I am not ready to expose myself at that level right now. And if you keep trying to expose me at that level, I'm going to get mad, you
Yeah.
know? Like that's part of what's going on with that. And so can we be more discreet? Can we be more compassionate? To realize, yeah, that's better like among the initiated, whatever. It can be you can but it's like don't just expect everyone to be okay with it.
Right.
Realize that it's like even you should be trusting the person you're telling about it,
Yeah.
because some of it may be crazy, some of it may be really mysterious and doesn't make sense, and so you need somebody that like can hold that with you and just kind of like a good friend, or that's like, hey, they're really going to listen to you, make emotional space for you to try to like feel that out together, say, well, what was that, you know
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think
Absolutely.
that's why it's important. And then the idea, and so yes, people get excited and they want to share with everybody. And if they want to help, it's like, it just, for us, it's like, keep it in the medicine. Do you know why you're
Mm.
doing it? Or if you're trying to help everybody and it's helping, okay, I guess that's a good reason. But if you don't know why you're doing it, then maybe slow down.
And even, even like within the context of like an integration circle, you know, uh, I always remind people like when you're sharing something, let people know if you want feedback or if you just want somebody to listen, because just listening can be, can be really transformative. And sometimes that's all you need. You're not looking for somebody to like add their 2 cents in, you're just expressing something that's vulnerable and, intimate to you. So I appreciate that that you brought that in as well.
Yeah, it's just like, and so that's another thing. Like, as we dialogue more and more about this kind of stuff in the society, then people, their sensibility maybe will improve around it, you know?
Yeah.
It'd be kind of like a little easier for you to see, like, oh, that's maybe this is their trauma. Maybe it's not, that we just hate each other. It's like maybe something happened. And
Yeah. It's an important thing to remember, is like a lot of the time the way that people react to you, whether it's the medicine or not, is has nothing to do with you personally. It's
right,
how they're filtering it through their experience and their traumas and their protective parts. And we tend to think like, oh, this is about me, and get then there's like a feedback loop, right, of like,
right,
oh, you're upset, so I'm getting upset, and it just sort of builds. But a lot of the time, I would probably say most of the time, it doesn't have anything to do with you.
right.
It's
I had
they're
this,
having they're having their own
yeah.
experience.
I was this family friend. He's this big guy. He's hanging out at some bar, and it's the kind of bar, people that challenge him. He's a big guy, so somebody a little drunk comes up, tries to challenge him, and he said his response to the guy was like, is, are you okay, or are you just like naturally aggressive? Like, what are you doing? Like what? This is like he's thinking, this is not me. Like I'm
Right.
just walking into this place. It's like, so
Yeah.
either something's wrong with you, or you're just always like this. You know, I don't know. I thought it was funny, but I should
Yeah.
get going here pretty soon.
Yeah. So before you go, how should people connect with you?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, we have the river course all through Modern Spirit, modernspirit.org, modernspirit.org. But it's a 7-week class, and it's a lot of fun based on my book, Fellowship of the River. And so that's one of the big things that I'm working on. And we have other retreats and stuff that we're doing, but they're all kind of full, dealing with healthcare providers. So that'd be the thing right now, to tell about the course, to tell about the book.
And we'll put
Yeah.
all that information on the show
And we're
page.
raising money, by the way, on the website. So modernspirit.org has a number of projects. One of them is our reciprocity project, which is raising money to pay for Native Americans to go through ketamine-assisted therapy.
Wow.
And so we've sent a number of people through, and it's like back to this whole bridging of culture and science and spirit. We've had some pretty beautiful results with some individuals, and it's a nice way to try to unload some trauma, and then take it from there. What's going to happen after the trauma unloads, right? That's what we're talking about. So thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Joe Tafur. It's a pleasure, and so wonderful to have run into you at the MAPS conference. It's another little ripple led to this interview, and
Yeah.
people listening or watching are getting the benefit of that. So, just like you mentioned, everything is interconnected in these really interesting, beautiful ways, and rippling out into the rest of the culture. So, thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom and experience.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Vital Point podcast. One of the easiest ways you can support the show is by subscribing to my email newsletter so that you don't miss any new episodes, as well as staying up to date on all the different breathwork, meditation, and other healing workshops and offerings that I'm doing online and in person in Tucson. So we'll put a link at the bottom of the show page to that, or you can go to beacons.ai/Blue Magic Alchemy to sign up. Find out more about breathwork and other offerings. That's beacons.ai/Blue Magic Alchemy to stay connected and in the loop. Thanks for watching or listening, and I will see you next time here on the Vital Point podcast.